She wants silver, she wants gold. Say your prayers, you might grow old. She likes ruby, she likes red. If she likes you, well, then you're dead.
That charming little ditty was inspired by the grisly events that took place here on a trail adjacent to Withrow Park in Toronto's East End back in 1877, when two young boys were found murdered, their bodies drained of blood. Was it vampires, you ask? Oh, don't be silly. There's no such thing. Yes, there is. No. They were the victims of a beautiful deranged woman who wore a veil to disguise her features and thus was dubbed by the newspapers the Blood Red Bride. I am Crowscratch, and you're in Haunted Toronto. Young Mary McPherson was an immigrant from Ireland. She possessed a stunning and unique beauty, both innocent and sensual, with foaming tresses and sea-green eyes that quickened hearts to dizzying desire. Mary worked as a maid here in what was in its glory days the home of the Sinclairs, a manufacturing dynasty. Pretty Mary quickly caught the eye of Timothy Sinclair, the youngest son, who fell helplessly in love with the Irish beauty. However, there was a slight problem. Timothy was already married with 4 small children. Nevertheless, love-struck Tim offered to put Mary up in a suite of rooms if she'd consent to be his mistress. Now, Mary was a good Catholic girl, raised by nuns, so any naughty, rumpety-pumpety out of wedlock was a big no-no. However, living in sin was infinitely more preferable than living in the ward. The ward was Toronto's squalid, disease-ridden slum that poor and desperate immigrants were consigned to. So while Sweet Mary was virtuous, she was also practical, and thus became a kept woman. And it was fantastic! Champagne, caviar, silk dresses, rubies and pearls. Mary was the belle of the ball, the toast of the town, and Timothy was the envy of all. Right up until Mary started talking. You see, Mary was very beautiful, no doubt, but she wasn't particularly bright. In fact, she had the IQ of a wet sock. There were turnips that could hold better conversations than her. Soon, admiring gazes turned to derision, snide whispers, and mocking laughter. And worst of all, Timothy grew bored of her. Now, Mary didn't want to be turned out into the street. She'd had a taste of the good life, and she liked it. No. She needed Timothy. And thus, our tale takes a tragic turn. You see, Mary believed Timothy's waning interest was because she was getting older, which was insane. She was only 23. Nevertheless, she convinced herself that aging was the problem, and she had to fix it. Mary remembered the nuns telling the story of Pope Innocent VIII, a rather misleading name. In 1492, while in the grips of a terrible illness, he killed 3 innocent boys and drank their blood. Miraculously, he was revitalized. In fact, the murderous pope seemed to get younger. Now, before you dismiss it as nonsense, understand, there is a long history of belief in the restorative powers of blood. The ancient Greeks called it ichor and believed it restored life and youth. So Mary came here knowing it was a popular shortcut for children on their way home from school, and disguising herself with a veil, hid in the bushes and awaited her prey. On October 21st, she bludgeoned 11-year-old Erasmus Talbot to death with a mallet, dragged his body into the bushes, and drank his blood. Immediately, she felt fantastic, invigorated, renewed. She met with Timothy later that night, brimming with voluptuous vitality. But once her desire was sated, Timothy informed her that he was reducing her allowance and moving her to a far more modest accommodation. Mary was devastated, confused. How could this be? What poor, naive, slightly dim Mary failed to realize was that Timothy was just another spoiled, rich, entitled brat that had grown bored of his plaything. But to Mary, again, not too big in the smarts department, the answer was obvious. She needed more blood. So she lured 11-year-old Willis McLean into the shadows, bashed his brains to pudding, and drained his blood. However, on her way home, Mary came across Constable Peter Talbot, who was out investigating the disappearance of his nephew, Erasmus Talbot, Mary's first victim. The constable saw Mary's blood-smeared veil and clothing and arrested her on the spot. Timothy Sinclair was absolved of any involvement, but Mary McPherson was found guilty of the murders and on the morning of February the 13th, 1878, was hanged by the neck, thus ending her brief but terrible reign as the blood-red bride. But our tale doesn't end there, oh no. Because for over a century there have been stories of children passing through this very spot and seeing a woman in a veil staring at them. And to a child, every one of them has said that the mere sight of her made their blood run cold. Well, maybe Mary should have tried a little Botox or a kale smoothie instead. Then again, sometimes the old ways are the best. Metallic. Speaking of the best, segue! Pick up my Haunted Library series of books, the very best and fiendishly frightening fun for the whole family. Just go to www.crowscratch.com or visit your local Amazon site. You won't regret it. Well, except for maybe the nightmares. Until then, bottoms up. Oh, that tastes like donkey butt.